The first encounter. Tom Evans leaned back in his leather seat in the Orlando International Airport's exclusive first-class lounge, tapping his fingers impatiently against his designer briefcase. The bustling world around him was an invisible blur. His mind was fixated on his phone screen, where a series of emails from his top executives kept him occupied. He frowned as he skimmed through an urgent message about a delayed shipment, muttering, "Unbelievable. What's wrong with these people?" Tom's multimillion-dollar business empire was built on a foundation of high standards, and he expected everyone around him to meet those standards, without fail. For him, life was a fast-paced game of strategy and precision, where there was no time for errors or inefficiencies. Now boarding Flight 3247 to Chicago. First-class passengers only, the gate agent announced over the speakers, breaking his focus. With a sigh, Tom tucked his phone into his pocket, adjusted his jacket, and stood up. As he made his way to the gate, he barely noticed the young woman scanning his boarding pass, offering only a terse nod in her direction as he moved on. Pleasant exchanges weren't on his agenda. Efficiency was. The flight attendants were already stationed at the aircraft entrance, greeting each passenger with warm smiles. One attendant, in particular, caught his eye. Her name tag read Sasha Cooper, and she stood with perfect poise. Her uniform crisp, her demeanor polished. Her smile was genuine, and she welcomed each passenger with a grace that seemed to effortlessly blend warmth and professionalism. "Welcome aboard, sir," Sasha said kindly as he passed her, and Tom returned her greeting with a dismissive nod, barely acknowledging her presence as he moved to his seat in the first row. He observed her as she helped another passenger stow their luggage, her movements smooth and practiced, her expression serene. Something about her calmness, her subtle confidence, rubbed him the wrong way, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. Maybe it was how she didn't seem rushed, as if she had everything under control, something he'd long prided himself on. The flight settled into its routine, with passengers chatting softly or settling into naps. Tom, however, was glued to his laptop, preparing a scathing response to his team for the latest mishap. His irritation was interrupted when Sasha approached, her expression as composed as ever. "Can I get you something to drink, sir?" she asked. "I need coffee," he replied curtly, not bothering to look up. "Strong coffee, and make it quick. I have work to do." Sasha nodded, her voice steady. "Right away, sir." Minutes later, she returned with a steaming cup of coffee. Tom took a sip, and his face twisted in displeasure. "This is lukewarm," he sneered, setting the cup down. "I'd expect a flight attendant to know how to make a decent cup of coffee, but maybe that's asking too much." Sasha's shoulders tensed ever so slightly, but her expression remained calm. "I apologize, sir. I'll bring you a fresh cup right away." "Don't bother," he muttered. "I don't have high expectations for this level of service." He shot her a derisive look, letting his words hang in the air with a bitterness that lingered like stale smoke. Nearby passengers exchanged glances, some visibly uncomfortable with the exchange. Sasha's professionalism held firm, but the subtle, restrained flicker in her eyes hinted at the impact his words had left. Yet she remained poised, choosing not to dignify his hostility with a response. She moved back down the aisle, her steps light but purposeful. Tom watched her, his contempt momentarily softened by curiosity. Something about her calm composure gnawed at him, though he dismissed it as unimportant, turning back to his screen and ignoring the murmurs around him. As the flight carried on, Sasha continued her rounds, ensuring passengers were comfortable and attending to their needs with practiced efficiency. She handled each request, no matter how small, with a care and patience that Tom found baffling. At one point, she helped an elderly woman to her seat, her tone warm and reassuring. The woman's appreciative smile brought a slight flush to Sasha's cheeks, though she quickly masked it, continuing her duties with that same controlled grace. Another hour passed, and Tom grew increasingly agitated. His work emails weren't providing the distraction he needed, and the cramped seat and confined space began to grate on his nerves. Eventually, he jabbed at the call button again. Sasha appeared beside him, maintaining her calm demeanor, though Tom sensed a hint of tension in her gaze. "Yes, sir. How may I assist you?" "This blanket smells," he said, holding it up like it was a piece of trash. "I'd like a new one, though I doubt you'd know what quality feels like." He added the last part in a low, cutting tone, making sure only she could hear it. Sasha stiffened, but she quickly composed herself, her eyes still polite but now guarded. "Of course, sir," she said, retrieving a fresh blanket and placing it carefully on his lap. Tom's gaze lingered on her, waiting for a reaction, a sign of frustration or anger. When none came, he let out a quiet, dismissive scoff. "Guess it's too much to ask for someone who's more seasoned in first-class service," he murmured, knowing she would hear him. Sasha's expression remained neutral, though a fleeting look of pain crossed her face. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked softly. Tom shook his head and waved her away, watching as she turned and moved back down the aisle. Her shoulders held high even as he sensed the tremor in her steps. He smirked, satisfied in putting her in what he believed was her place. As Sasha retreated to the galley, she pressed her hands against the counter, her grip firm as she focused on steadying her breath. Years of training and professionalism flooded her mind, reminding her to maintain her composure no matter the situation. But Tom's words weighed heavily on her, each one cutting deeper than the last. She closed her eyes, remembering her mother's advice. "Never let them see you break. Stand tall, and show the world your strength." Her heart ached, but she pushed the hurt aside, focusing instead on the duties that remained. There were still several hours left in the flight, and she couldn't allow herself the luxury of vulnerability. Not now. Just then, a sudden commotion erupted in the first-class cabin. The sounds of panicked voices reached Sasha, breaking through her thoughts. She took a steadying breath, pushing aside her feelings, and rushed forward, guided by a strong sense of duty. As she reached the front, her heart skipped a beat. Tom was hunched over in his seat, his face pale, and his hand clutching his chest, his breathing labored and shallow. "Please," Tom gasped, his voice a thin whisper filled with a desperation that starkly contrasted with the arrogance he had shown earlier. Without hesitation, Sasha knelt beside him, her training and professionalism taking over. A matter of life and breath. Sasha's hands worked quickly, guided by the countless hours of medical training she had undergone. She crouched beside Tom, her face a picture of concentration as she assessed his condition. His face was ashen, beads of sweat covered his forehead, and his breaths came in short, gasping bursts. For a moment, his eyes met hers, not with the hard arrogance from earlier, but with something different. Fear. "Mr. Evans," Sasha said calmly, her voice soft yet steady, "I need you to try to relax and take deep breaths with me. I'm here to help you." Tom struggled to respond, his pride momentarily overridden by a basic need for survival. He clenched her arm tightly, his grip desperate. I can't breathe," he wheezed, panic flaring in his eyes. Sasha's face softened with a trace of empathy, despite the hurtful words he'd hurled at her earlier. She looked back over her shoulder and spotted Jenny, the other flight attendant, who was already approaching with the emergency medical kit. Sasha gave her a quick nod, motioning for her to retrieve the onboard oxygen mask. "Stay with me, Mr. Evans. We're going to get you through this," she said, her voice firm and confident. As Jenny handed her the oxygen mask, Sasha adjusted it over Tom's face, guiding him to breathe in and out with each mechanical hiss of oxygen. She placed one hand gently on his shoulder, the other steadying the mask, and counted each breath aloud to keep him focused. The once arrogant businessman was now a picture of vulnerability. Gone was the indifference and entitlement he'd worn like a suit of armor. His eyes were wide with panic, and his hand remained clenched around Sasha's, as though she were his only lifeline. His breaths slowly aligned with her counting, each one gradually becoming less frantic. As she held him steady, Sasha noticed the passengers around them watching in silence. A few murmured quietly, but most were visibly moved by the irony unfolding before them. The same woman he had belittled and mocked now working tirelessly to help him. Some exchanged glances, while others simply watched, a mixture of awe and discomfort in their expressions. "Sasha." Tom's voice came in a hoarse whisper from beneath the oxygen mask, his eyes searching hers. I'm sorry." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence as a fresh wave of pain surged through his chest. "Don't speak, Mr. Evans," she replied, her tone still gentle but unwavering. "Just focus on breathing. We'll have you feeling better soon." As minutes passed, Sasha continued monitoring Tom's pulse and oxygen intake, her actions swift and precise. Her fingers pressed lightly against his wrist, feeling the erratic beat of his heart slowly steady under her care. She couldn't deny the sting of his earlier words still lingered, yet here she was, staying by his side, pushing aside her own hurt to ensure his well-being. Her professionalism overruled any personal grievances, and her compassion overpowered the bitterness she had felt. Jenny reappeared, whispering that the captain had been notified and that they were considering a possible diversion if Tom's condition worsened. Sasha nodded, keeping her focus on Tom. She loosened his tie slightly to allow better airflow, and Tom's breaths began to fall into a more regular rhythm, though his face remained pale. Thank you," he muttered, his voice barely audible. A tremor of guilt seeped through his tone, his eyes no longer able to hold her gaze. Sasha met his gaze, giving him a quiet nod. "Let's just focus on getting you well, Mr. Evans." After a tense few minutes, Tom's breathing finally eased. The color started to return to his cheeks, though he still looked visibly shaken. The panic had subsided, but there was a new vulnerability in his eyes. His grip on her hand loosened, though he didn't let go entirely, his fingers lingering as though unwilling to break the contact that had saved him. Around them, the passengers watched, many visibly moved by the scene that had unfolded. They had witnessed the transformation of a man who had arrived on the plane in command of his world, reduced by his own mortality to seeking comfort from the very person he had demeaned. Sasha's calm professionalism had stood in stark contrast to Tom's earlier display of arrogance, and the passengers took it all in, some glancing at each other with knowing nods. Finally, Tom found his voice again, though it was shaky. "I don't deserve your kindness, Miss Cooper," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. I treated you terribly, and you still saved me. Why?" Sasha took a moment, her eyes reflecting both strength and compassion. "I'm here to do my job, Mr. Evans, and my job is to make sure all my passengers are safe and cared for," she replied simply, though there was a gentle firmness in her words that left no room for misunderstanding. "That includes you." Tom looked away, ashamed, the weight of his actions pressing heavily on him. He had always prided himself on being a man of success, of control. But in this moment, stripped of his usual defenses, he was forced to confront his own flaws. The woman he had so carelessly insulted had become his rescuer, standing by his side when he needed her most, showing him a compassion he had never afforded her. The plane continued its steady course, the soft hum of the engines filling the cabin as the tension gradually dissipated. Sasha finally stepped back, signaling to Jenny to keep an eye on Tom as she prepared to return to her regular duties. But as she turned to leave, Tom reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he gently touched her arm. "Please," he said softly, his voice fraught with emotion. I need you to know that I'm sorry. I can't even begin to imagine what you must think of me." Sasha paused, taking a steadying breath before looking down at him. Her gaze was unwavering, but her expression held a hint of sadness. "What I think, Mr. Evans, is that people are often quick to judge others without really knowing them. You may think of yourself as successful, powerful, but respect, true respect, is earned by how we treat others. I hope you remember that." Her words, though gentle, struck him harder than any accusation could have. He felt the weight of her gaze, her steady presence, and he nodded slowly, unable to find words to respond. In her calm yet pointed words, he felt the shame he had spent years avoiding, a shame that grew more potent with each beat of his heart. Sasha turned away, her steps composed as she resumed her duties, tending to the other passengers with the same kindness and professionalism she had shown throughout the flight. Tom watched her retreat, his mind racing with regret, guilt, and a profound awareness of the woman he had just encountered, a woman who had shown him strength, grace, and resilience despite his scorn. The rest of the flight passed in a tense, reflective silence. Tom remained quiet, his once steely gaze softened, his thoughts tangled in the realization of his own flaws. The memory of Sasha's gentle yet firm words echoed in his mind, each sentence a reminder of the person he could have been, and perhaps still could be. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, Tom's chest felt heavy, but not with the remnants of his health scare. It was something deeper, something that made him look at himself with an unfamiliar and uncomfortable honesty. The descent of reflection. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, the hum of the engines and the subtle shift of altitude signaled the end of the journey, but for Tom Evans, the real journey had just begun. He sat back in his seat, his gaze fixed on the city lights twinkling far below, his mind churning over the events of the flight. He could still feel the faint tremor in his hands, a reminder of how close he had come to something far worse. Yet it wasn't the fear of his health that weighed on him. It was the way he had treated Sasha. Tom's mind replayed each word he had thrown at her, each sneer and insult. He had torn her down, trying to remind her of her place, convinced that his wealth and position gave him the right to judge her worth. And yet, when he had been at his most vulnerable, she had stood beside him, steady and compassionate, without a hint of malice. Her calm, dignified presence lingered in his memory, contrasting starkly with his own behavior. The plane touched down, the rumble of wheels against tarmac breaking his reverie. Tom swallowed, feeling the weight of his own shame pressing down on him like a physical force. He glanced around the cabin, catching glimpses of the other passengers, who occasionally looked his way with a knowing mixture of judgment and sympathy. He realized they, too, had seen his transformation from an arrogant businessman to a humbled, helpless man reliant on the very person he had tried to humiliate. It was a look he hadn't felt directed at him before, pity, not admiration. As the seatbelt light turned off, passengers rose, gathering their bags from the overhead compartments. Tom remained seated, unwilling to face the walk down the aisle, where he'd have to pass the very people who had watched his downfall. Instead, he watched Sasha as she moved through the cabin, assisting passengers, her demeanor as composed and professional as ever. She moved with a quiet strength that he hadn't truly noticed until now, her resilience evident in every step. When most of the passengers had filed out, Tom finally rose, moving to the aisle and retrieving his designer briefcase. He straightened his jacket, forcing himself to exude the calm authority he had always relied on. But as he approached Sasha, who stood near the exit thanking departing passengers, his confidence faltered. She met his gaze briefly, her expression neutral, and for a moment, he saw in her eyes the remnants of the pain he had inflicted. She hadn't let him break her, but he could see now the strength it had taken for her to maintain her dignity. "Sasha," he began, his voice low and uncertain. She looked up, her expression polite but guarded. "Yes, Mr. Evans. He hesitated, struggling to find the words. "I wanted to thank you for what you did back there." She gave a small nod, her face remaining composed. "You're welcome, sir. I was simply doing my job." There was a pause, and he saw her glance at him with a faint trace of sadness. "But it wasn't just your job," he said softly, his voice breaking slightly. "You saved me when I didn't deserve it. After everything I said to you." Her gaze softened, but her tone remained professional. "Mr. Evans, it's true that the things you said were painful. But I'm a flight attendant. My duty is to ensure every passenger's safety, regardless of how they treat me." She paused, her eyes searching his. People often think that their position in life gives them the right to treat others any way they wish. But respect isn't about wealth or status. It's about the person you are when no one is watching. Her words were spoken calmly, without anger, yet each one pierced him with an honesty he hadn't encountered before. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You're right," he managed, his voice choked with regret. I realize now that I spent too much of my life looking down on people, assuming that my success made me better. But today," he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Sasha gave him a small, understanding smile. "Mr. Evans, everyone deserves a chance to learn and change. Maybe this is your chance." He nodded again, her words echoing in his mind. "Thank you," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. With a final nod, she turned, returning to her duties as he left the plane. Feeling the weight of his actions settle heavily on his shoulders, walking through the terminal, he was absorbed in a haze of self-reflection, each step filled with a growing awareness of the person he had been, and the person he might yet become. The next day, back in his luxurious office high above the city, Tom couldn't shake the memory of Sasha's words. He looked around the room, at the polished mahogany desk, the plush leather chairs, the framed awards and certificates that adorned the walls. They had once filled him with pride, a testament to his success, but now they felt hollow. The veneer of prestige and power that had shielded him from facing his flaws had cracked, and through that crack, he could see the truth about himself. He reached into his desk drawer, pulling out his phone. For a moment, he hovered over his contacts, his finger lingering above the name of his longtime friend and business partner, Greg. They had shared the same views on success, priding themselves on being self-made men who rose above the competition through hard work and discipline. But now, those values felt skewed, tarnished by a lack of empathy he could no longer ignore. With a sigh, Tom placed the phone down, shaking his head. There were no quick fixes for the change he needed to make. This would require real introspection, a willingness to confront the parts of himself he had buried beneath his success. He thought of Sasha, of her quiet strength and resilience, of how she had held her head high despite his attempts to tear her down. Her words replayed in his mind. Respect isn't about wealth or status. It's about the person you are when no one is watching. His assistant entered the office, breaking his thoughts. "Mr. Evans, I have the report on the overseas shipment delay. Would you like me to go over it with you?" Tom looked up, noticing her calm, patient expression, an expression he had always taken for granted. "Yes, please, Jessica. And thank you for your hard work. I appreciate it." Jessica paused, blinking in surprise. Tom Evans wasn't known for his kindness or for thanking his employees. She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Of course, Mr. Evans. Thank you." As she left, Tom leaned back in his chair, a small but profound sense of change stirring within him. He had always seen himself as a strong leader, a man who commanded respect through power and success. But for the first time, he began to realize that true respect was something far deeper, something he had to earn, not demand. The days passed, and Tom found himself reevaluating his approach to both his business and personal life. He began greeting his employees by name, taking the time to ask about their well-being. He started making decisions with a new sense of empathy, considering the impact they would have on those around him. And though the shift was gradual, those who worked under him noticed. The hard, often indifferent businessman was slowly transforming into someone they could truly respect. One evening, as he sat at his desk reviewing documents, his mind drifted back to Sasha. He wondered where she was, if she remembered him, if she even cared about the changes he was making. Part of him wanted to reach out, to show her that her words had taken root, that he was trying to be a better person. But he knew that would be selfish. This journey wasn't for her approval. It was for him, and perhaps for the people he had yet to meet. Several months later, Tom attended a charity event hosted by a close friend. The event was filled with the usual crowd of socialites, entrepreneurs, and prominent figures, all mingling over glasses of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Tom navigated the room, exchanging polite greetings and engaging in light conversation, though his mind remained elsewhere. As he moved through the crowd, he spotted a familiar figure near the entrance. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized her, Sasha Cooper. She stood in conversation with a small group, her smile warm and genuine, her eyes lit with a calm confidence he had grown to admire from afar. Without a second thought, Tom made his way over, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he had to speak with her, to thank her in person for the change she had unknowingly sparked within him. "Sasha," he said softly as he approached. She turned, her eyes widening slightly in surprise before she recovered, her expression guarded yet polite. "Mr. Evans," she replied, her tone measured. "It's nice to see you again." He nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "Please, call me Tom. I just wanted to say thank you. For helping me see what I couldn't see in myself." She looked at him, a flicker of understanding passing through her eyes. "I'm glad you found something meaningful in that experience, Tom." They spoke for a few more minutes, a conversation filled with mutual respect and quiet understanding. As they parted ways, Tom felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. Sasha had given him a gift, not of forgiveness or friendship, but of clarity, the kind that only comes from seeing oneself through the eyes of another. For the first time in his life, Tom Evans felt truly humbled, and he knew that this change, born from a single encounter, was only the beginning of the person he was meant to become. A test of character. Months had passed since that brief encounter with Sasha at the charity event, but her presence lingered in Tom's thoughts like an indelible mark on his soul. Her words and actions had inspired him to make small but meaningful changes in his life, and he had gradually begun to see the ripple effects in his relationships, his business, and his own sense of self. He no longer took his employees for granted, often pausing to thank them, to ask how they were doing, or to offer a word of encouragement. He'd begun to realize that his success, while achieved through hard work, was not solely his own accomplishment, but a collective effort that included countless hands he had once overlooked. One cool autumn morning, Tom sat in his office, gazing out over the city skyline. His office had always been a sanctuary of sorts, filled with polished mahogany furniture, tasteful artwork, and mementos from his many business achievements. But recently, he'd begun to feel a strange disconnect from these material symbols of success. They no longer brought the sense of pride they once had. The office now felt like a space he occupied out of habit rather than joy. He was starting to question what lay beyond the tangible accomplishments that defined his life. He was startled from his thoughts by a knock on the door. It was Jessica, his assistant, who stepped in, looking slightly anxious. "Mr. Evans, there's a young man here to see you. He says he's here on behalf of a client, but he doesn't have an appointment." She hesitated, noting the slight crease in Tom's brow. "Should I ask him to come back later?" Tom was about to refuse when he paused. Months ago, he might have brushed off an unannounced visitor without a second thought. But now he was curious about the encounter, wondering if this was another opportunity to test his newfound humility. "No, that's fine, Jessica. Let him in." Jessica nodded, relieved, and stepped out. Moments later, a young man entered, probably in his early 20s, dressed in an ill-fitting suit and looking visibly nervous. Tom could see the young man's shoulders tense as he took in the lavish office, a hint of awe mixed with trepidation on his face. "Good morning, Mr. Evans," he said, extending a slightly shaky hand. "Thank you for meeting with me. My name is Jordan." Tom stood up, taking the young man's hand firmly but gently, offering him a reassuring smile. "Good to meet you, Jordan. Please, have a seat. And don't worry about the formality. What can I help you with today?" Jordan's posture relaxed a bit, and he took a seat, carefully placing a worn leather portfolio on his lap. I work with a small non-profit organization. We provide mentorship and educational programs for underprivileged youth. We've been trying to expand our reach, but, well, we're struggling to secure funding." Tom listened, nodding attentively, though he could tell Jordan was nervous. The young man's words were earnest, and his eyes held a flicker of determination that reminded Tom of his own early days. But unlike Tom, who had started his career with substantial family support, Jordan seemed to be doing this on sheer willpower alone. Jordan fumbled with his portfolio, pulling out a few documents and handing them to Tom. "We have some projections here," he said, stumbling over his words. "And I believe, with the right backing, we could really make a difference." Tom looked over the papers, the charts and numbers clearly put together with limited resources, but with obvious dedication. His instincts, honed over years in business, could see the gaps, the financial uncertainties, and the lack of experience behind the proposal. Yet what he saw most clearly was Jordan's passion and his unwavering belief in the cause. "What drives you to do this, Jordan?" Tom asked, setting the papers down. "Running a nonprofit isn't exactly a lucrative choice, and it's a difficult path." Jordan's face softened, and his expression shifted to something vulnerable yet resolute. "I grew up in one of those neighborhoods, Mr. Evans. I know what it's like to feel like the world has given up on you before you even start. I had a mentor who changed my life. He made me believe I could be more than my circumstances. And now, I want to be that person for someone else." Tom sat back, his mind flashing to the countless people who had come into his life over the years. He thought of Sasha, of the simple act of kindness she had extended to him despite his behavior. Her grace, her resilience, and her quiet strength had made an impact on him in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time, he felt a sense of responsibility to pay forward the lesson she had unknowingly imparted. "Jordan," Tom said slowly, a faint smile playing on his lips, "I think your organization has a lot of potential. You're young, and there's much you'll need to learn, but passion like yours can't be taught. I'd be willing to support your project, with a few conditions." Jordan's eyes lit up, his mouth opening in a mixture of shock and gratitude. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Evans. I can't tell you how much this means. Whatever conditions you have, we'll meet them." Tom chuckled softly. "It's not as daunting as it sounds. I'd like to personally mentor you and offer some guidance on managing funds, networking, and scaling your organization responsibly. And, in exchange, I ask that you do the same for the youth you serve. Teach them the importance of empathy, humility, and resilience, because those qualities are just as important as any business strategy." Jordan nodded eagerly, his eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and newfound determination. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. I won't let you down. I promise." As the young man left, Tom watched him go, feeling an unfamiliar sense of fulfillment. Supporting Jordan's cause didn't bring him any material gain, but it filled a void that his previous pursuits had never quite managed to reach. This was a different kind of success, a success measured not in wealth or status, but in impact and purpose. Several weeks later, Tom found himself attending a community event organized by Jordan's nonprofit. It was an open house day where the organization showcased their work and introduced potential donors to the young people they supported. Tom had agreed to attend out of curiosity and a sense of commitment, but he found himself unexpectedly moved by what he saw. The community center was a modest building in a struggling neighborhood, far from the glitzy offices and five-star venues Tom was accustomed to. But within its walls was a vibrant atmosphere filled with laughter, music, and an undeniable sense of hope. Young people, many of whom wore hesitant but hopeful expressions, shared their dreams and aspirations with volunteers and guests. As Tom walked through the halls, he encountered a young woman, probably no older than 18, standing beside a display board filled with colorful drawings and handwritten notes. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting up with a shy smile. "Hello, sir. Are you one of the donors?" she asked, her voice timid but friendly. Tom smiled, nodding. "I'm Tom, And yes, I'm here to learn more about the work Jordan and his team are doing." She extended her hand, and he shook it, noting the strength of her grip. "I'm Kayla. I've been coming here for a year now. I didn't think places like this could make a difference, but it really has." Tom listened as she shared her story, a story of challenges he could hardly fathom. Kayla had grown up in an unstable home, facing struggles that no child should endure. But since joining the program, she had discovered a love for art and found solace in a community that believed in her. Her words resonated with Tom, a reminder of how little he truly knew of the world beyond his privileged sphere. "Thank you for sharing your story, Kayla," he said, his voice soft. "Your strength is inspiring." Kayla looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. I want people to know that we're worth investing in. We have dreams too, just like everyone else." Tom felt a surge of pride for Jordan and his team. They had created something extraordinary, a place where young people like Kayla could feel seen and valued. And it was a humbling reminder of his own journey, of the change that Sasha had sparked in him, and of the purpose he had found in giving back. As he left the center, he felt a new sense of clarity. He was still Tom Evans, successful businessman, but he was also something more, a man on a journey to redefine his legacy, one small act at a time. And perhaps one day he would be able to tell Sasha that her quiet resilience and kindness had inspired him to do the same. It was a small beginning, but he knew that true transformation often started with a single, unexpected encounter. And as he drove away from the community center, he realized that his path was no longer about rising above others, but about lifting others along the way. A turning point in perspective. Tom Evans' involvement with Jordan's nonprofit had quickly shifted from mere mentorship to something much deeper. What had begun as a formal agreement turned into a heartfelt commitment. And soon, Tom found himself visiting the community center every week. He attended meetings, helped organize events, and even sat in on workshops for the young adults who were learning new skills. Each interaction offered him a fresh perspective, challenging his long-held beliefs about success, worth, and happiness. One particular day, Tom arrived at the community center to find it bustling with activity. Jordan and his team were preparing for a special event, a celebration to honor the young people who had completed a 6-month training program. Tom had quietly funded much of the program, but he hadn't expected to be asked to speak. However, when Jordan approached him with a hopeful smile and requested he share a few words, Tom couldn't refuse. Standing in front of the audience, a mix of young participants, proud family members, and local volunteers, Tom felt a knot of nervousness he hadn't felt in years. Public speaking had always been easy for him, but this crowd was different. They didn't care about his wealth, his business achievements, or his usual polished speeches. They wanted to hear from a genuine human being, not the corporate executive he had spent his life becoming. Taking a deep breath, Tom began, "Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be part of this journey with you. I used to think success was about how much you could gain, about reaching the top of whatever mountain you set for yourself. But being here with all of you, it's taught me that true success is measured by the people we lift along the way." He paused, his gaze moving over the faces before him, many of whom were listening with a quiet intensity that moved him. This center, this community, it's not just a place for training or support. It's a place of transformation. And I say that not just because I've seen you grow, but because being here has changed me as well. Each of you has inspired me to reimagine what my life could be, not just as a businessman, but as a person. The crowd's applause was genuine, filled with warmth, and Tom felt his throat tighten. He realized that this was the first time he had spoken from his heart, without the need to impress or prove himself. It was a moment of vulnerability, and he had never felt more grounded, more real. After the event, Tom mingled with the young participants and their families, each interaction deepening his sense of purpose. A shy teenage boy approached him, holding out a sketchbook. "Mr. Evans, I heard you like art," he said nervously, opening the book to reveal beautifully detailed pencil sketches. Tom studied the sketches, portraits of family members, animals, even imagined landscapes. "These are incredible," he said, his tone filled with admiration. "Have you considered pursuing this seriously?" The boy hesitated. "Maybe. I want to. But it's hard to think about dreams when you're just trying to get by." Tom nodded, understanding the boy's reality in a way he wouldn't have months ago. "I know the world tells us that dreams come second to survival. But if you ever need support, guidance, or even just someone to talk to, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Your talent deserves to be nurtured." The boy smiled, a look of surprise and gratitude lighting up his face. It was a look that reminded Tom of Sasha, the same quiet resilience, the same strength in the face of struggle. He realized that in his efforts to change, he was coming closer to. Tom felt a surge of anger. He understood the nature of real estate deals. He'd been on the other side countless times. But this was different. This wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary, a place of hope, a lifeline for so many young people. Losing it would be devastating. "Jordan, I'll handle it," Tom said, his tone resolute. "Don't worry about a thing. I'll make sure that building stays in your hands." The days that followed saw Tom diving headfirst into negotiations with the landlord. He offered to buy the property outright, to secure it under the nonprofit's name, ensuring it would remain a community center for years to come. The landlord, a seasoned businessman himself, recognized Tom's determination and agreed to the sale, impressed by Tom's commitment to preserving the center's purpose. A month later, Tom stood with Jordan in front of the center, a sense of triumph washing over him as they watched the community members gather for the announcement. It was a cool evening, and lights strung across the entrance created a warm, inviting glow. Families, volunteers, and young participants filled the area, the atmosphere buzzing with excitement and relief. Jordan addressed the crowd, his voice filled with gratitude. "Today, we celebrate not only the preservation of this center, but the dedication of someone who believed in our vision, even when the odds seemed stacked against us. Without Mr. Evans, this wouldn't have been possible." Tom felt a mix of humility and pride as the crowd applauded, their cheers echoing through the chilly air. When he stepped forward to speak, he found himself looking at familiar faces: Kayla, the young artist, the shy boy with the sketchbook, and so many others who had come to mean so much to him. "Thank you, everyone," he began, his voice carrying a warmth that had once been foreign to him. "I may have started this journey thinking I was here to help, but in truth, you all have given me so much more than I could ever give back. You've shown me the true meaning of community, of resilience, and of purpose. This center belongs to you now, and I have no doubt you'll continue to make it a place of hope for everyone who walks through its doors." As he stepped back, Jordan approached him, his face filled with gratitude and admiration. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. You've changed so much, and you've changed all of us too." Tom nodded, his heart full. "I owe that change to someone who showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. It's a lesson I hope I can keep living up to." That evening, as Tom walked to his car, he glanced back at the center, its windows glowing warmly, filled with the laughter and joy of the people inside. He was no longer just a benefactor. He was a part of something bigger, something meaningful. And in that moment, he felt a contentment he had never known. But as he reached his car, he paused, catching sight of a familiar face standing near the edge of the crowd. His breath caught in his throat. It was Sasha. She was watching him with a small, approving smile, her arms folded as if she had been there the whole time, witnessing his journey from afar. Surprised but pleased, Tom walked over, his smile genuine. "Sasha, I didn't expect to see you here." She nodded, her eyes reflecting a warmth he hadn't seen in a long time. "Jordan invited me. He mentioned how much you've done for the center. I thought it was time I saw it for myself." Tom felt his face flush, humbled by her words. "I have you to thank for all of this, you know. It was you who taught me what real strength looks like, what kindness really means. Sasha looked at him, a quiet pride in her gaze. People often underestimate the power of change, but you've proven it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. And then she extended her hand, and he took it, feeling a sense of closure and gratitude flow between them. It was a gesture of respect, forgiveness, and understanding, a bridge between their past and the new lives they had each built. As she turned to leave, Tom watched her go, a sense of peace settling over him. He realized that while he had once sought wealth, power, and status, he had now found something far more valuable: redemption, purpose, and a renewed sense of self. And as he drove home that night, he knew that this journey was only beginning, each step guiding him toward a life filled not just with success, but with meaning. A new beginning. The morning sun spilled across Tom Evans' kitchen as he sipped his coffee, gazing out over the cityscape. In the past, mornings like these had been defined by tight schedules and looming deadlines, every minute meticulously planned to maximize productivity. But today, as he looked out at the world, he felt a calm he hadn't known before, a sense of fulfillment that came from something deeper than ambition or accomplishment. For the first time, Tom felt grounded not in what he had achieved, but in what he had given. The phone buzzed beside him, breaking the silence. It was a message from Jordan. Just a reminder. Today's mentoring session with the youth group is at 3 p.m. They're looking forward to seeing you. Tom smiled, replying with a quick thumbs up. The mentoring sessions had become a staple of his weekly routine, a commitment he honored with more dedication than even his most important business meetings. Each session, he would sit with the young men and women, sharing stories from his own life, both the successes and, more importantly, the failures. He had come to realize that vulnerability was the truest form of connection, and each session left him feeling more alive, more human. At exactly 2:45 p.m., Tom arrived at the community center. The once familiar sense of detachment he'd felt upon entering had been replaced by a feeling of belonging. The walls of the center, decorated with hand-painted murals and inspirational quotes, were a stark contrast to the polished elegance of his corporate office. Here, everything was raw, real, unfiltered, and it was exactly where he wanted to be. As he entered, he was greeted by the usual chorus of warm greetings and smiles. Jordan approached him with a clipboard in hand, his face beaming with pride and excitement. "Tom, the group is ready for you. I can't tell you how much they appreciate your time. You've made such an impact on them." Tom chuckled, waving off the compliment. "I think I'm learning as much from them as they are from me, Jordan. They remind me of the things I overlooked, the parts of myself I lost along the way." Jordan nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes the greatest lessons come from those we least expect." They walked into the activity room, where a circle of chairs awaited. The young men and women sat chatting among themselves, their eyes lighting up as Tom entered. Over time, he had come to know each of them by name, learning their stories, their dreams, and their struggles. There was Aaron, a shy boy with a passion for coding; Maria, a fiercely intelligent young woman determined to become a doctor; and Darnell, a budding entrepreneur who reminded Tom of himself in his younger days, brimming with ambition but weighed down by the realities of a tough upbringing. Tom took his seat, looking around at the group, feeling a swell of pride and admiration. "All right, everyone," he began, smiling. "Today, I thought I'd share a little about something that changed my life. Not so long ago, I was sitting at the top of the corporate world, convinced I had everything I needed. But I didn't realize that while I was busy climbing, I'd left a part of myself behind. I'd forgotten what it meant to really see people, to treat others with respect, not because of their status, but because they deserve it." The group listened intently, their eyes reflecting a mixture of respect and curiosity. Maria raised her hand, and Tom nodded to her. "Mr. Evans," she began, her tone earnest. Was there a moment when you realized you needed to change? Like a turning point. Tom thought for a moment, his mind flashing back to that flight, to Sasha's calm, resilient face, to the compassion she'd shown despite his behavior. Yes, he replied softly. There was someone who treated me with kindness and respect, even when I didn't deserve it. She showed me that change isn't just possible, it's necessary. And since then, I've tried to honor that lesson by living with more humility and compassion. The room fell silent, each young person absorbing his words. Aaron, the quiet coder, spoke up next, his voice barely above a whisper. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm stuck, like people already see me a certain way, and there's nothing I can do to change that. Tom looked at Aaron, feeling a pang of recognition. He had once felt that same way, trapped in an image he had built for himself. Aaron, people may see you in a certain way, but it's never too late to reshape who you are. The most powerful changes often start with the smallest steps. Sometimes it's just about proving to yourself that you're more than the world expects you to be. Aaron nodded, a flicker of hope appearing in his eyes. Tom continued, sharing stories of his early years, the challenges he had faced, and the hard lessons he had learned through his own mistakes. He spoke openly, without the polish or bravado he had once used to mask his insecurities. And in that room, surrounded by these young, hopeful faces, he felt a connection that went beyond words. After the session, as the group began to disperse, Tom noticed a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. His heart leaped when he realized it was Sasha. She had come to visit the center several times since their chance encounter, and each time, her presence seemed to anchor him, reminding him of the journey he had embarked upon. Sasha, he greeted her warmly, stepping over to meet her. You made it. She smiled, her gaze soft and warm. I didn't want to miss seeing you in action. You're good with them, Tom. They respect you, not just for what you've done, but for who you are. Her words filled him with a sense of pride that went beyond his usual accomplishments. Thank you, Sasha. That means a lot coming from you. They walked outside together, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves. As they strolled down the street, they spoke of the past few months, of the progress Tom had made, and the lessons he was still learning. It felt natural, effortless, as if they had known each other for years. At one point, Tom paused, looking over at her with a seriousness he hadn't shown before. Sasha, I want you to know that I'm here, doing all of this because of you. You didn't have to be kind to me that day, but you were. And that one act, it changed everything. You showed me what I was blind to. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Sasha looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. Tom, kindness isn't something we give because people deserve it. It's something we offer because it's who we are. I saw a man who had lost his way, and I thought maybe, just maybe, a little compassion could help him find himself again. Tom nodded, humbled. You're right, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor that compassion. They continued walking, the silence between them comfortable and profound. It was a silence that spoke of forgiveness, of redemption, and of a shared journey that neither of them had anticipated. As they reached the corner, Tom hesitated, feeling a sudden urge to ask her something. Sasha, I know this is unexpected, but would you join me for dinner sometime? I'd love the chance to get to know you better, not just as the person who changed my life, but as a friend. Sasha smiled, a glimmer of surprise and warmth in her eyes. I'd like that, Tom. I'd like that very much. Dinner with Sasha was a quiet, intimate affair. They met at a small, cozy restaurant that overlooked the river, and as they sat by the window, Tom felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Over the meal, they spoke of their lives, their families, and their dreams. Tom shared stories of his children, who had recently noticed the changes in him, asking questions that had led to heartfelt discussions. Sasha listened, offering insights and laughter that seemed to weave a deeper connection between them. By the time dessert arrived, Tom realized that Sasha had become not just a reminder of his transformation, but a true friend, someone who had guided him from darkness to light without ever asking for anything in return. And as they lingered over coffee, he felt a sense of joy that came not from status or wealth, but from a genuine bond that felt rare and precious. At the end of the evening, as they walked out of the restaurant, Sasha turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way, Tom. But remember, this journey doesn't end here. Keep challenging yourself. Keep pushing to be better. That's how we truly honor the lives we touch." Tom nodded, her words settling deep within him. "Thank you, Sasha, for everything. You've given me a second chance, and I won't waste it." They shared a warm embrace, the kind that felt like a promise to keep moving forward, to keep striving for a better version of themselves. And as Tom watched her walk away, he knew that his life had changed forever. The next morning, he returned to the community center, not as a benefactor or businessman, but as a man committed to a purpose greater than himself. He was no longer just Tom Evans, CEO of a successful company. He was Tom Evans, mentor, friend, and a man who understood the value of kindness and compassion. As he stepped into the center, greeted by the smiling faces of those he had come to care for, he knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with meaning, purpose, and a legacy he could finally be proud of.